Hello all, this is the Owl. Before we start this one out, two quick things. Firstly, I've been fighting one absolute wanger of a cold, so the audio quality, or at least the quality of my voice, will be somewhat variable. Not helped by the fact that I've been recording this video on and off for about a week now. Secondly, if you hear any strange thumping sounds, that is because it's been bloody freezing, and so Baby Owl has been herring around the house. Yes, it's adorable, yes, it's frustrating, and no, there is nothing I can do about it. And with that, on with the show. Hello all, this is the Owl, and oh man, has this one been a while coming. So, back in the distant misty dinosaur days of mid-2022, I let it slip that my favourite horror manga of all time was likely Higurashi, a piece of media that I consider to be the dog's bollocks, the cat's pyjamas, the bee's knees, the ant's, pants? Yeah, I got nothing. Whatever combination of animal parts or clothing items mean that a thing is bloody amazing. See, if the Higurashi manga were a fighting game, it'd be One Must Fall 2097. If it were a symphonic metal band, it'd be classic Nightwish. If it were a steak, it'd be prime rib. If it were chocolate, it'd be Cadbury's Top Deck. I think you get the point. By all of that I mean, there are plenty of other good examples of a thing. Hell, even excellent examples. But in its era, Higurashi reigned supreme, and I would argue that it still does today. Now, when I was inevitably asked, I told folks that I would be happy to cover it when I got to 10k. Mimity meme, jokety joke. Naturally, I never anticipated getting to that milestone because I had, I think, a few hundred subscribers at the time, and my content is mostly kind of mid. And it's also because, well, this is a manga that, while I adore it, it also terrifies me as a content creator. It's huge. It's dense, it's messy, it's complex as all hell, and it's also incredibly long. Oh, and it's one that others have already covered to some extent, albeit in a lot of video series that peter out around Arc 2 because of all the aforementioned things. Of course, then it happened, and suddenly I'm creeping up on 20k, meaning that for the past while, I would wake up to several Higurashi when messages pretty frequently, with even Mrs. Owl getting in on the fun sometimes. So, alrighty then. It's time that this injustice was rectified. So, this November, we'll be doing not just one, but two Higurashi videos. And, okay, see, before we even get started here, I need to say one thing. Go and buy this manga. Don't wait on it. Don't go and read it on some scanlation site. Don't sail the high seas. And above all else, do not rely on this or any other video in place of the actual story. As always, I'll be going deep on this one, but there is no way I can do it credit. This is a manga that you should read yourself from start to finish. Yen Press do very reasonable rates, a mostly decent job of translation, especially for that era, and they are extremely friendly to content creators such as myself, as so far as it pertains to copyright. Now, as my intros tend to be somewhat divisive, and this one is, spoiler, going to be a long one even for me, I am going to split it into two parts. If you are not interested in my rambling on about the creation and the creators of this manga, its wider cultural significance both in Japan and abroad, and the rules we'll be abiding by when making what is going to be an absolute monster of a video series. When this is all finished, I'm serious, if this doesn't break the 24-hour mark when it's compiled, I will eat my own keyboard without ketchup. Please just skip ahead to the first numbered bookmark and enjoy the video. For everyone else, well, let's get this show on the road. So, starting out, the question must arise. How in the name of Nurgle's festering butt crack do you cover something as good, as dense, and as long as Higurashi? I mean, where the hell would you even start? Well, I guess you'd start at the very beginning. Once upon a time, space dust began to accumulate around a gravitational core, and over millennia, the Earth was forged. Okay, too far back. The story behind Higurashi's conception and its birth is fascinating, but it's slightly dubious, due to the reclusive and secretive nature of its creator, known only by his alias Ryukishi-7, someone who is also, by the sounds of it, a bit of a troll. Ryukishi allegedly found himself in a vocational school specializing in manga creation, but he struggled to find work as, well, he was allegedly shite-ass at drawing. You and me both, mate. Instead, he attempted to write a play, Hinamizawa Bus Stop, which apparently wasn't very good either, resulting in him deciding to become a civil servant instead. However, his younger brother, as they both enjoyed video games, suggested that he instead try making a visual novel, as a final go at achieving his dream of making a living being a creative, which, okay, spoiler, it worked. Hell, before I forget, Ryukishi is writing the next big Silent Hill game, and I am just so excited for that. Talk about a match made in heaven. Regardless, they thus decided to adapt his play into a visual novel, with Ryukishi writing and his brother doing the coding, the name being changed into Higurashi no Naku Koro ni, or When the Cicadas Cry, releasing it in 2002 to a, well, fairly positive, if very minor reception. It nonetheless earned a small but fiercely loyal audience. And while it wouldn't become the juggernaut franchise we know today, until the anime adaptation, it quickly gained a reputation spread around various message boards in Japan, and later the West, for being incredibly well written, having a gripping mystery, and being balls scary. Around 3 years later, someone at a small Kadokawa affiliated studio noticed how sodding good the story was, and took a chance on an adaptation, picking it up for a manga, with Ryukishi again writing, with the very talented and creative, but still unknown Karin Suzuki doing the art. Again, two no-namers who, spoilers, knocked it so far out of the park that the ball landed in a cricket stadium halfway around the planet. And this was the start of the series' momentum. And when the inevitable but admittedly fantastic anime adaptation by Studio Deen began airing the following year, well, the rest is history. Hell, I would argue that Higurashi is just as popular, just as influential, and just as vital today as it ever has been. Not only in terms of its original run, but because of the noticeable effect it had on the horror genre in manga and anime, essentially creating its own downbeat Gap Moe meets Twin Peak takes on small-town horror genre, inspiring later masterpieces like the even more bleak character drama Satogashi, which I've covered on this channel previously. And yet, ask manga fans if they've heard of Higurashi, and they'll probably say sure. Ask them if they've read Higurashi, and they will say nope, I've heard it was very confusing, or perhaps more likely, nope, I'm really not into torture porn. Which, yeah, okay, I get it. See, Higurashi does have a certain reputation, and it's not entirely undeserved on either count. There is, for sure, a decent amount of squick. It's not Mai-chan or Blade of the Immortal, but especially towards the end, it is not an easy read. And the fact that it's a mystery story at its heart also means that it can be really slow in places, particularly its first arc, and often rather confusing. But that's only a fraction of what Higurashi is about, and see, that is the interesting part. If you were to ask me why I consider this manga not only to be bloody amazing, but also legitimately important as a landmark piece of fiction, especially as an aspiring writer, I could argue that the characters are great, the writing is sublime, the mystery is compelling, the gore is suitably nauseating, and its depiction of turn-of-the-century deep country Japanese life is superlative. A slow burn, sure, but trust me, when this thing gets warmed up, it's white hot. Beyond this, it's a pitch-perfect counterpoint to the over-romanticized, Ghiblified image that Japanese folks tend to have when it comes to small-town life. It's an enjoyable meta-commentary on the mystery genre as a whole, a treasure trove of urban legends, superstitions, and village customs. It's just, it's so good. Now, does this mean that Higurashi is perfect? No. It doesn't start especially strong. And you know what? We've got a hell of a lot of ground to cover, so we should probably start kicking up dust. Apologies all, but before we do, the rules. Firstly, we will only be focusing on the main manga series here. Yes, all 32 cock-nobbling volumes of the thing, probably one per video, maybe two per video later on. We won't be looking at the visual novel, which, spoiler, I have never finished because it's like 1,000 hours long. We won't be looking at the admittedly great anime adaptation by Studio Deen. We won't be touching the novels or the side stories. We won't be looking at Kai, Oni, Sotsu, Go, or Rei, at least until we're done. We won't be looking at the live-action movie, the TV drama, yes, that exists, and we certainly won't be talking about the pachinko machines. Wait, what? Higurashi pachinko machines? You might as well tell me that there's a Maiden Abyss. What? Go home, Japan. You're drunk. Rule number 2. Yes, Umineko exists, but we won't be touching it at all. Higurashi's slightly dotty big sister is... Okay, believe it or not, I love Umineko. When Umineko is at its best, I think it may be even better than Higurashi. However, Umineko is as meta as dicks and balls, bordering on outright pretentious. And it's also the longest thing ever written by a living human being. Oh, and it's also completely pants on head, howling at the moon insane. Seriously. So yeah, Umineko at 100k, right? He says, half-jokingly, what have I done? And on that note, lastly, a reminder. This will eventually all be compiled into several larger, and finally one Leviathan video when and as this is doable. So yes, if any segments or this introduction seem excessive, they may be less so in the context of what this will eventually become. Okay. And with all of that, let's get started here. Welcome to Hinamizawa, a lovely little village where nothing ever happens. Enjoy your stay. We kick off Volume 1 with a series of full-colour panels that I always forget are here in the story and are waiting to ambush me every single time I start. These panels absolutely break me, and you won't understand why until you get way deeper into this manga because, oh right, see, short version, this manga is incredibly creative in almost every single way. And one of those ways is how it's structured. I will explain more when we get there, but later arcs recontextualize earlier arcs in ways that, let's say, even a cynical old bastard like me starts crying like a baby, and that takes some doing. And sure, you may as well start a counter for how often I say this, but you will see what I mean when we get there. Anyways, we get several full-colour pages. The only two really important ones are the first two. We see several images. Keiichi, our protagonist, on all fours sobbing. Hair and brain matter. A baseball bat. Blood. And finally, something laid over a village. All while the dialogue tells us, /him, that no matter what he does, he will be forgiven. But that the speaker wishes, beyond all else, that he would only forgive her. We also get a name, Frederica Berncastel. And yes, this should all be holding up a neon sign saying, "You will forget me, and I will be vitally important way later." As the dream, or whatever that was, fades, we see Keiichi awaken on the train, and we learn that they're moving out to the deep country, a tiny village called Hinamizawa. Keiichi will, as mentioned, be our protagonist moving forwards. And he's probably the least fleshed out of the main characters, which is kind of understandable, as he often works as more of a player character / reader surrogate. But the main character of this story isn't Keiichi, or, to be honest, any other character. The main character of Higurashi is Hinamizawa itself, which is so textured and so wonderfully constructed for us by the writer and artist team here that I remember more about it than many places I actually lived in Japan. We will learn more as we go, but in short, it's, okay, just say it, Quiet Mountain Town. In Gifu Prefecture, heavily inspired by Shirakawa. More specifically, I think it's based on a slightly modernized version of the historical Ogi village. Let's just say that one of the reasons this story is so significant for me is that while I didn't live in Shirakawa, I lived in the same area, and this manga just, it nails the setting to the wall. Now, one thing to take note of here. The manga is ostensibly set in the early 80s, and it's kind of important. I've talked about the lost decades to death on this channel already. Go and watch Gantz or Satogashi if you want to hear that lot. But in a nutshell, the 80s were the final decade of prosperity for Japan, and small towns like this were not being hollowed out the way they would be in the future. That said, and this may be a controversial take, the setting of the 1980s feels inconsistent, and more of an excuse for certain kinds of technology not being available than anything essential to the plot. Hinamizawa feels more like a small town would at the time the manga was written, only that everyone agreed to never buy a cell phone, and that's mostly a conceit, as cell phones or even the internet would probably have changed the way the story played out. Regardless, we get a nice close-up of a cicada, the titular Higurashi, which places us in mid to late summer. Keiichi is on the way to school, and muses that he's actually okay with his small-town life. Little details like this are hidden all over the place, and will be crucial to remember if you want to solve the mystery at play here, at least before the story starts spoiling it for you, he left for a few days to go and attend a funeral in the city. I am gonna guess it's Takayama, then returned. The reason he enjoys his small town life mostly comes down to the friends he's made. We meet the first of these, Rena Ryugu, who he walks to school with. He notes that her last name is odd, bordering on ostentatious. Having the name Ryugu in Japan is kind of like having the last name Pendragon. Regardless, he enjoys teasing her by flirting with her, which causes her to blush and get wiggly. Mion Sonozaki is the next of the friend group. She in turn flirts outrageously with Keiichi. At school, we see that another friend has set a trap. It's ye old eraser wedged in the sliding door so that it falls onto whoever enters, but it turns out that this is a multi-layered trap set by the third of the friend group, Satoko Hojo, and the final one, Rika Furude. This little quintet will be our main characters for the duration of the story, and you will note how much we're already learning about them without too much in the way of direct exposition. Rena is the soft-hearted, air-headed ditz of the group, nurturing, sweet, easily flustered, and as loyal as anything. Has a weakness for cute things. Mion is the wealthy, tomboyish big sister type. She's an overachiever and is talented in nearly anything she attempts. She flirts and teases Keiichi to cover for her secret fear that she's too masculine and is thus unattractive. Satoko is a cunning little prankster with, oh yeah, we'll get into her backstory later and oh boy, that one is a lot to deal with. And Rika is the cute as a button little sister trope, but also something of an enigma. Now, no, bugger off Hanayo, we're not doing that bit anymore. But yes, there are a few elephants in the room and we will address them as we go. But fine, Higurashi is, among a bunch of other things, a riff on the harem genre in visual novels, and yes, this is a little weird if you think about the character ages, with Satoko and Rika being 11 and the rest ranging from 13 to 14. It's harmless, unless you insist on taking it a certain way, but yeah, there are one or two moments that do read a bit sus, especially by modern sensibilities. Still, I wouldn't stress, as it's never played in a gross manner, okay, with a handful of minor exceptions. There is one particularly big and smelly elephant, but we'll get to him way later on. Anyways, we see our characters in class, just having a ton of fun together, interacting and giving the audience a chance to get to know them too, and okay, this next bit is interesting enough to deserve its own little segment, so let's take a look. Yup, it's time for a tangent. So, one thing to note here is the class itself being a mixture of ages and grades, and still not particularly big, because it consists of all the kids in the village. This may sound strange, and it is a little atypical even in Japan, but it does make sense. See, this is what I mean by the 80s setting feeling like more of an inconsistent conceit for the sake of storytelling rather than being essential to the setting. Everything else feels much more like the early 2000s, which again makes a lot of sense as this is when the story was written. As mentioned before, Japan underwent a dreadful recession after the post-World War II economic bubble burst, with the country having primarily been propped up by Western investment and trade agreements. This, along with the rapid and catastrophically declining birth rate, resulted in the hollowing out of towns and villages, with young adults or people with families heading for Tokyo, Osaka, and other big cities to search for work, profit, and a better life for their kids. This, in turn, led to a rather bizarre effect that still continues today, whereby any small town or village is going to have a severe lack of kids and almost nobody between the ages of 18 and 50. It is outright uncanny at times. I know that my town was often referred to as the old age home without a roof. Naturally, this also meant that there was a glut of schools, with the number of students steadily declining over time, leading some schools to have no kids whatsoever in certain grades, and only a few dozen overall. Thus, slowly but surely, all the local schools gradually merged together, and this effect continues today. Lots of wonderfully eerie, deserted schools to explore for one. And I can attest to this personally, as someone who lived and worked in an analogous area. It wasn't uncommon to have maybe 3 or 4 kids maximum in each grade, even in these combined schools, depending on where I was teaching that week. That said, I don't think I ever encountered a mixed class like this, and I suspect that it might be something else that exists more for the sake of telling the story, but I could be wrong. Did any of you grow up with this kind of mixed class? I am genuinely curious. If so, let me know in the comments. Anyways. Later, after a great day at school, we get some more good-natured, half-joking, half-real flirting between Keiichi and Rena, with him approaching it more as teasing and her being, well, just pretty damn adorable, but maybe taking it a bit more seriously. It's an interesting dynamic for sure, and it is, by the way, yet another thing that will be somewhat important later on, and spoiler, is absolutely crucial to understanding the story of Umineko. Now, a challenge. I want you to look carefully and see if you can maybe spot something about the panels I show. Can you guess one of a few reasons why covering this manga is somewhat intimidating as a content creator? See it? Well, how about this partial page where Rena is showing Keiichi around the village and they run into Mio Takano, an attractive nurse from a local clinic, and are quite surprised that she already knows his name. Yes, again, this manga really does capture some aspects of small town life so damn perfectly, especially the whole everyone knows everyone else and tends to be all up in their business a lot, for both good and ill. As the local foreigner, and thus being already pretty visible, this could be rather frustrating at times. But alright, if you haven't spotted it yet, this manga is insanely panel dense, and it's also extremely wordy in quite a few places. So much is packed into every single page that, yeah, on one hand, every time I read it, I spot new clues or details that floor me, but on the other hand, oh boy, was I dreading covering this. It doesn't just have length, it has girth. And yes, I just realized I said that out loud. This is going to be a very long series with a lot to talk about, so buckle in, chaps. Regardless, Keiichi and Rena spend the afternoon exploring the town together, with her showing him the sights. Keiichi notes that there really isn't that much to do here in the way there would be in a city. There's a Shinto shrine, a large suspension bridge. Yes, these locations will be explored extensively later on, and that's kind of it. But it also has other charms. Oh, and this next bit is a lot of fun. Rena tells him that, even though it's getting dark, there is one last spot she wants to show him. He's intrigued, only to realize that it's a garbage dump, or rather, okay, see. Throwing stuff away in Japan can actually be rather difficult, especially bulky items. There tends to be a fee attached to it, which for electronics can be brutal. And if you get unlucky, certain items can be literally impossible to dispose of in any official or legal way, simply due to bureaucracy. This is why for so many items, the smart thing to do is to sell it to a second-hand store, even if it's just for a few yen. It's cheaper than what you would pay to get rid of the bloody thing. Of course, this is not always possible. For instance, when I moved in, my first apartment had a tatty old CRT TV, which was supposed to be returned to the manufacturer for disposal in the early 90s, but said manufacturer no longer existed, meaning that I was stuck with the thing unless I wanted to find someone to drive me about an hour to the closest eco station, which itself would involve filling out a lot of forms and waiting around for ages. Oh, and about 10,000 yen in fees. And more, they only opened from 9 AM to 3 PM on weekdays and were closed on weekends and holidays. Which, yeah. And don't even get me started on what it takes to get rid of a car. Of course, people being people, a much more pragmatic solution for things you can't just throw away or can't hock is to find some overgrown spot out in the country and just dump it there. Then the next person will come along and go, oh, there's already trash here. A bit more won't hurt. And suddenly you've got these little trash mountains scattered here and there in the most rural areas, which unfortunately do tend to expand out into larger illegal dumps. Sometimes a local municipality will send out a crew to clean it up. Sometimes they won't, and it'll get really out of hand. Anyways, Rena says that it's not trash. It's stuff she finds adorable, including a discarded oil drum, much of which she plans to take back home with her. Rena, you're such a goblin sometimes, I swear. They also run into this dude, Tomitake. Yeah, there are a fair few characters in this thing, but to the manga's credit, most of them are very distinct, immediately recognizable, and anyone important gets pretty fleshed out at some point. He's an eccentric photographer, but is also just a really good dude. And they get talking, with Tomitake wondering what the hell Rena is doing. And Keiichi jokingly tells him that she's looking for the pieces of a dead body that she hid here, to which Tomitake responds that, yeah, it was a terrible incident indeed. Wait, what? Rewind a bit there, bro. Yeah, Keiichi's expression here is pretty spot on. Rena interrupts and Tomitake leaves before Keiichi can get any more information. And we also get this is so much fun. Rena wants him to help her drag out a statue of Colonel Sanders. Yes, he of Seven Spices fame, naturally slightly altered because Japan doesn't play around when it comes to copyright. Now, as I've mentioned, there are actually a lot of allusions in this story to well-known Japanese superstitions and urban legends, some of which are likely quite obscure to foreign audiences. And while this could also be a bonus round, we just did one, so in brief, this one dates back to the 80s and is just, I have to tell you. When the underdog Hanshin Tigers beat the Seibu Lions in the Japan baseball series, a victory ritual occurred where players would jump into the iconic Osaka Canal. Yes, that one. And as he wasn't present, a stolen Colonel Sanders statue was thrown into the river by fans due to its resemblance to Randy Bass, the Tigers' American star batsman? Hitter? Yeah, no, I'm a farm boy from South Africa, so baseball lingo may as well be Greek to me. Regardless, the statue was never recovered, and the theft actually got some news coverage, as such things are naturally kind of a big deal in Japan. The loss of the statue began a nearly 20-year losing streak, with the victory celebration ritual not carried out until 2003. where the Hanshin Tigers finally beat the Giants, mostly due to good fortune in available players on both sides, and this resulted in a massive, raucous and drunken celebration, culminating in over 5,000 fans jumping into the canal, and from there things got out of hand, including a drowning death for a fan that got pushed in by some butthole. And this resulted in new rules and an entirely new bridge being built, not kidding, to stop future insanity. Amusingly enough, while the statue would in fact be recovered from the bottom of the canal in 2009, the Tigers wouldn't break their curse for another 20 years, and the statue was given a mock burial ceremony in 2024. A weird one, but a great one. Anyways, Keiichi asks Rena if she knows what Tomitake was going on about, and she immediately seems uncomfortable. She mentions something about a dam. Spoiler, this illegal dump was going to be the site of said dam, but then kind of trails off, saying she doesn't actually know. Keiichi pushes matters, but she suddenly looks right at him with a very off expression and confirms firmly that she doesn't know. Well, that's concerning, but only for a second. It turns out that Rena is also a transfer student, and thus may well not know. Keiichi walks home with her as the Cicadas start up, still mildly troubled. The next day, we get a pretty fun interlude. We won't be covering these in any great depth, aside from where they directly connect to the core plot. You can enjoy them when you read this thing, but the girls get him to join their club at school, which mostly involves playing a variety of games, with amusing and occasionally borderline inappropriate punishment penalties for the loser, and everyone cheats outrageously but cleverly. Think the first part of the Chunin exams in Naruto. These are actually a lot of fun, and do serve to create an almost Gap Moe-like effect, in that they contrast incredibly harshly with the nastiness to come, something that Keiichi himself alludes to here. Later, he's chatting with Mion and asks her about the weird stuff Tomitake was talking about, and she responds by telling him the story, and okay. This is incredibly interesting. There was once a plan to construct a hydroelectric dam on the local river. This would have created a lake, which would have submerged Hinamizawa and displaced its residents. This led to a great deal of controversy, protests, sit-ins, and all sorts of conflict between not only Hinamizawans, yes, I'm going to use that term, but also between Hinamizawa and the government who, in her words, played dirty. However, she then begins to pussyfoot, saying that, oh, the village elders were eventually able to negotiate, and the project was called off completely. Keiichi asks her if there was any violence, and, much like Rena, her demeanor changes abruptly, and she says no, none. And okay, you know what? This is too interesting to let it pass by, so the Hinamizawa Dam project is almost certainly a reference to the notorious but allegedly heavily suppressed and censored Miboro Dam controversy from the early to mid-50s. Now, the 50s were an interesting time for Japan. The economy was booming, but the infrastructure of the country was struggling to keep up, particularly in terms of electricity. The country was still both in the process of rebuilding after the war and undergoing massive industrialization, and there was a stark division between rural areas, which were still practically medieval in some respects, and the heavily developed and Americanized urban centers. In order to meet power needs in the area, the government announced that it would be building several dams on the Sho River in Shirakawa, the region Higurashi is allegedly based on. The problem? This would completely wipe out several villages, villages going back thousands of years in some cases, submerging them to the bottom of the lake like something out of Edgar Allan Poe. And this is where the story becomes hard to follow, which does make sense in a way. Japan has never been a particularly open country, especially when it comes to the dirty shite the government pulled in and around that time. Cough cough comfort women, cough cough Minamata disease, cough cough Unit 731, and hell, for good measure, cough cough Shinzo Abe. Yes, we will get to you when we do the next Starving Anonymous video. In brief, the villagers protested quite extensively, and allegedly the government in response played kind of rough. The dam did get built, displacing thousands of people, wrecking farmland, and destroying tons of ancient houses and shrines. There are rumors about how bonkers things got, including violence and intimidation, as well as more mundane governmental shenanigans like bribery and straight up ignoring regulations. But yes, we're talking about rumors about rumors about rumors, and even the actual dates are difficult to confirm. So yeah, even talking about this is complicated because, again, this was an era where the Japanese government was incredibly image conscious, I guess coming out of World War II, especially as far as it pertained to the outside world. And yes, that thumping sound is Baby Owl doing something out of the room. Regardless, this was a period before the internet, so it wasn't too hard to contain, obfuscate, or even straight up censor discussions of shady stuff they were doing in order to modernize the country and to attempt to change its image from a viciously repressive imperial power to a peaceful, democratized, and industrialized modern nation. Now, I did stumble across some information that 2 cherry trees were moved and planted in Shirakawa, both out of respect for those displaced and as a sort of "we will remember what you did" mark of defiance, sort of a double middle finger raised forever. A very Japanese way of protesting. So yes, this was almost certainly a big influence on Higurashi and what is being alluded to here. Anyways. Later, Keiichi helps Rena extract her statue, but when she goes to get him a drink, he spots a whole bunch of, right, these look like girly mags, and they kind of are, but they're actually tabloid magazines that also feature everything from bikini pictures to softcore nudes. Now, these were actually sold over the counter in convenience stores until fairly recently. Technically, a lot of chains banned them in late 2017, but this only became strictly enforced in 2019, ahead of the Olympics. Image again. Now, okay, this bit is actually insanely important, but not in a way I can discuss without huge spoilers. Let me just say, take note, engage your noggin, and see if you spot something odd here. Keiichi reasons that these are old magazines, and thus, if the damn project was such a huge controversy here, there might be an article on it. Sure enough, he finds, oh sweet Jiminy Christmas, yeah right. The gore in this manga is wild. And this isn't funny haha, oh look at all the wobbly red bits, Starving Anonymous gore. This stuff feels realistic, and at times almost like actual crime scene photos. This gets even more extreme in Umineko, by the way, including that one panel early on that I still don't understand why more people don't reference it, because crikey Moses. I will take a few risks here and there, but naturally a lot will need to be censored out. Go and read this thing yourself if you want all of the nasty. The article shows, in explicit detail, the mangled and decomposed corpse of a man who was attacked by multiple assailants before being hacked apart with an axe of some kind. The right arm was never found. Keiichi turns and, oh, probably wishes he was wearing his brown pants, as do I. Rena is standing behind him with an odd expression, and she's carrying a, okay, let's get this out of the way because this has always bothered me. Rena is carrying a large, edged farming implement that if anyone has access to the Japanese version, or even the raws, could you tell me what the Japanese refers to this as? Because the English translations seem to have it as either machete or cleaver, when this looks to me like a billhook, something between a machete, an axe, and a sickle. However, a bit of digging suggests that this might actually be a nata, a versatile if slightly obscure cutting tool, once again somewhere between, yes, a machete or an axe. Even more interestingly, this appears to be a tomari nata, basically a Japanese billhook. These are actually incredibly rare and valuable today, with only a single smith, now retired, producing these in a prefecture neighboring Gifu. Rena made quite a find here that's likely worth a few 100,000 yen at least. It's not terribly important, but it's still interesting. Anyways, they eventually pause their work, and Rena thanks Keiichi before heading home. The next day, back at the club, we get another genuinely endearing sequence, where Keiichi and his friends have more fun in games, this time seeing him win, and force the girls to dress up in cosplay and serve him. Yeah, again, the optics on some of this stuff probably wouldn't fly today, but I think it's pretty harmless, especially as the situation is soon inverted. It's very clearly all in good fun, and not supposed to be titillating in the least. However, as much as he's loving the time he spends with his chums, he cannot help be a little bit disturbed, unable to get the damn murder out of his head. And yes, apologies if my audio sounds a bit, underwater. I'm having to filter out a lot of background noise here, including what sounds like baby owl training for a marathon. Time passes, and eventually, at the height of dead summer, Keiichi is invited out with the club to have fun at the local summer festival, Watanagashi, or cotton drifting, and yeah, folks who've read the manga or speak fairly good Japanese know that this term has another, far more sinister meaning, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Summer festivals, we'll probably talk about them more in a later video, TLDR version. These are incredibly important to villages. Almost every single one, plus every town or ward within a city, generally has at least one festival, and these often date back centuries. Hell, sometimes millennia. In many cases, they are loose recreations of some very dark stuff, including brutal executions, battles, and the like. They also tie heavily into Shinto practices, particularly ancestor worship and both celebration of and prayers for a good harvest. Festivals are an absolute blast and an excuse for everyone to let their hair down, mingle, get absolutely pixelated on homebrewed sake, and enjoy a variety of festival foods and activities at booths. While Shirakawa doesn't have anything like the Watanagashi from my cursory research, they do, interestingly enough, have a summer festival celebrating, I kid you not, Doboroku, or moonshine sake. It's sort of like lumpy, alcoholic sour milk. Not my favorite thing in the world. Tastes about the same going down as coming up, actually. That said, I do miss the festivals with every fiber of my being, and the sound of taiko drums and yokobue are inextricable from my best memories of small-town Japan. Rena picks Keiichi up at home with a very funny exchange between Rena and Keiichi's mother that, yeah, too many tangents, so we're gonna skip. Also, something else to note. Keiichi and Rena are starting to get very close. They're now holding hands, but she remarks that he seems preoccupied as of late, and she's really happy to see him cheering up. Aw, Rena, you're such a good sort. Soon, the rest of the gang arrives, and two things to note here. Firstly, while the yen press translation is mostly really good, it is occasionally a bit off. Just keep in mind that this translation does sort of predate the big manga boom in the West, and thus the big manga translation boom. Rika is wearing a shrine maiden outfit, more about this later, which Mion's grandmother made. She uses the word obacha, which is probably an attempt to recreate her pronunciation of obachan phonetically. It's not terribly important, but it's a bit confusing. Basically, it's an affectionate term for a grandmother. Regardless, they have a ton of fun having their various contests in and around the booths, but are interrupted by Tomitake again. And Mion says that she knows him. And yeah, another weird translation here, but in context, Oji-sama is a respectful and fairly formal way of addressing your elders. Translating as, I don't know, Mr., Sir, it's tricky. And she says that he actually stops by a few times a year. Huh? That's strange. However, when Keiichi asks him exactly why he's snapping pictures and where he intends to publish them, he deflects. As always, lots to take note of, subtle stuff in and around the margins, but important. They all have a really great night, and it seems like Keiichi and Rena are, becoming something of a couple, with Mion poking good-natured fun at them, and Keiichi finally admitting that he really is starting to love it here in Hinamizawa, and resolves to stop obsessing over the dam incident and just enjoy his time with his friends. We then see, at the culmination of the festival, Rika doing the sacred Kagura dance as the local Miko or shrine maiden. Yes, we will have to go down that rabbit hole eventually as this gets crucial towards the final arcs, but think an important, often hereditary ceremonial role to bring good fortune for the coming year. It's a practice dating back to the Jomon period, so we are talking hundreds of years BC. And it's had a tumultuous history, especially where the state either tried to control or ban Shinto practices. She is holding an odd implement, an ornate hoe adorned with yushide, paper streamers essential to Shinto shrines, made to repel or expel bad luck or evil spirits, as well as demarcating sacred areas. You've probably seen them all over the place in anime and manga, and you see them frequently in Japan too. We also learn about the Watanagashi in a bit more detail. A futon is torn open with the hoe. Villagers take a piece of cotton from inside and let it drift down the local river, presumably carrying their bad luck with it, while giving thanks to Oyashiro-sama, the village deity. Yes, these guardian spirits or small gods are a really important thing out in the country and are also rooted in Shintoism, with probably the most analogous thing being Roman tutela or penates. These are, however, not something generally discussed with outsiders. Mion telling Keiichi about it is more evidence that he is starting to be accepted as a true Hinamizawa now. Soon after, however, he finds himself alone, and this marks the turning point in the arc. We're about to get a pretty sizable exposition dump with a ton of really important shit to remember for the larger mystery here, so go and grab the beverage of your choice and let's take a look. After a momentary distraction, Keiichi realizes that his friends have wandered off, leaving him alone, but runs into, oh yowza,
Hello, nurse!
Mion, the smoking hot blonde from the local clinic, who, yes, I know, she's a cartoon, but this character, man, wait, how old is she? Phew, mid-30s. It's an anime, so you never know, but again, yowza. Regardless, she is the one who knew his name and who also appears to know Tomitake rather well. Somehow, they wander onto the topic of the dam murder, despite Tomitake clearly being uncomfortable with her telling this sort of stuff to a kid. And yeah, she basically unloads it all onto him. On the night of the festival 4 years ago, the director of the dam project was discovered dismembered, with one of the arms as of yet never recovered. This was followed by strange and eerie events on the night of the festival every year. On the next, a local husband and wife who supported the project went on a trip and due to inclement weather fell off a cliff. Both were killed and the body of the wife was never recovered, presumably having been washed away by the river below. The next year, a local priest died suddenly of indeterminate causes, and shortly after, his wife drowned herself in a swamp. The following year, a housewife who had some relation to the couple who fell off the cliff was gruesomely beaten to death with a bat. Ever since the murder that seemingly put an end to the dam project, the night of the Cotton Drifting Festival is inevitably marked by a strange, often horrific death of people who were either in support or did not actively oppose the dam, or those who had some relation to said people. This became known as Oyashiro's curse, and the local superstition is that the village deity, now angered, reaches out year after year to punish those who failed to protect Hinamizawa or who have simply offended Oyashiro somehow. What time did the latest train leave? Especially when you realize that tonight is the night, and who exactly is going to die next? Well, anyone with a sense of narrative causality can probably guess, but I'll let you try to figure it out. She leaves a now pretty uneasy Keiichi and a somewhat gobsmacked Tomitake just before all the girls show up again. They all play together and then say a really cute and fun cheers to Tomitake, who is genuinely taken aback by the incredibly sweet and endearing messages they write on his shirt, saying to come back and play with them again, which he says he will treasure forever. Damn, man. This reminds me of the messages my students wrote for me when I left Japan, and now sorry, the allergies this year are really bad. Regardless, he and Rena head home, with Keiichi musing on this new information. It's almost certainly coincidence in regards to the timing, and his friends were likely being evasive because they were scared of getting cursed. Okie dokie, kind of understandable. Nonetheless, despite his attempts to reassure himself, he's still not in the best frame of mind as he goes home that night, not helped by him finding the portent of a dead, ripped apart cicada. No, that's not ominous at all. The next day, Keiichi is pulled out of class by a detective. Never a good sign, especially not when it's this unpleasant-looking dude by the name of Oishi. He immediately gives Keiichi a really bad vibe, wanting to speak with him in private and offering him a meal. Keiichi responds with surprising hostility, essentially telling the off-putting cop to say what he wants to say and then bugger off. Again, man, going through this story for it must be at least the 10th time. It is amazing how much stuff is being set up and how many genuinely helpful clues are being dropped, even this early into the story. But the reader is, yeah, okay, I'll stop. No spoilers. It's just, it's hard, man. Sure enough, he informs Keiichi all while behaving in a very inappropriate and kind of threatening way that Tomitake, the photographer, died last night in a bizarre and horrific fashion, as I'm sure most of you guessed was coming. The way he died though, oh boy. In short, he frantically scratched at his own throat for an extended period of time, eventually succeeding in ripping it open with his fingernails, dying of exsanguination shortly after. The curse of Oyashiro has struck yet again, and also, bloody hell. But this is only the start of the weirdness. Tomitake was also, according to Oishi, attacked by multiple people before his death, and had fended them off with a bulk of timber, before seeming to take his own life with his bare hands. Oishi raises the possibility that this was some sort of weird-ass homicide done by the villagers, which does, oddly enough, semi-confirm some of the weird suspicions Keiichi and I'm sure that you yourself considered, realizing that he might well be in danger himself. After all, he's been a nosy Nigel, asking a lot of questions. He reluctantly agrees to speak with the creepy detective in private. Oh right, Higurashi has really good art, but you might not cotton onto it just yet, as I will happily admit that the first couple of volumes are a little awkward in places. Oh, the expressions and character designs are great, and I love the creative use of paneling, even though it does sometimes make things feel even more crowded than they need to be. However, trust me, the art not only gets way better, there are moments when, right, no spoilers, is used to tell the story in just how the art is used. We'll actually get to an example pretty soon. Anyways, Oishi tells Keiichi that the reason he suspects some sort of plot within the village, masquerading behind the curse, a plot to punish those it views as wrongdoers or traitors, but this is where it gets difficult. See, the deaths during the first 2 years were obvious in terms of motive. The director of the dam project was mobbed and hacked to death, as he was a direct and immediate threat to Hinamizawa. A group of villagers taking him out and calling it divine justice, well, you don't need Columbo to figure that one out. But then it was a priest who was little more than a fence-sitter, as well as his wife. Then someone who was simply related to someone who was in favor of the dam. Motives rapidly become blurry, and victims seem chosen on shakier and shakier pretenses. Now we have someone who, despite being something of an unknown quantity, did seem to be genuinely good, and if he was somehow killed by the village, possibly with a drug of some kind, well, it would be a bizarre and awful death for little more than being an outsider. Something here doesn't quite fit, and Oishi then asks Keiichi for his help to make sense of all of this by, if he sees or hears anything, to keep quiet and report to Oishi personally, and to absolutely not tell anyone, especially his friends, any of this, especially not Mion. The reason being that the Sonozaki family, who we'll get to eventually, and I'll just say right now that they're one of the things in the story that I don't think quite works. But basically, they're pretty shady too in their own way, they're very important to the village, and they were vehemently and at times violently opposed to the dam. Mion herself got into some hot water during the protests. Keiichi agrees, but is extremely reluctant, torn between his loyalty to his mates and wanting to learn the truth. And yeah, we now have the first item of the mystery laid out to us, but we don't quite have enough pieces to even really start to solve it. And more than that, I'm not gonna say for now. The next day at school, Keiichi is poorly slept and very distracted, but he overhears some gossip about someone vanishing the night of the festival. Only this one is a woman. So it appears that 2 people have, yet again, been affected. A man found dead and a woman vanished. He also overhears the term onikakushi in a discussion between Rena and Mion, which is in fact the name of the arc. It doesn't translate well. Yen Press run with demoned way, I don't know why, but it's probably closer to being abducted or hidden away by demons. Although it could actually be read a slightly different way, which, as always, we will get into in a later arc. Again, lots of fun clues all over the place here, maybe a few more if you speak a bit of Japanese and think laterally. Rena worries that, as another outsider, she'll be taken next year. Mion reassures her that no, she was a villager, left, and has returned, so she should be safe. to which Rena counters by implying that so was someone else who vanished, to which Mion immediately cuts her off. That said, considering both this and the fact that his friends are so close and just wonderful people, he realizes that he has no answers here. How could these people be part of some sort of village murder cult that would be better suited to the investigative attentions of Nicholas Angel than a teenager? Yep, there's a deep cut. Later he and Rena are cleaning the club room when he finds an old game sheet with the names of the 4 girls and, a 5th name, Satoshi. Outside, he asks Rena about this, and once again she starts acting really cagey and denies any knowledge. What is going on here? And alright, very small spoilers, but it is something that I do want you to keep in mind. Firstly, Satoshi is going to be super frigging important moving forwards, and is going to be, in many respects, the Laura Palmer of this story. Kind of a MacGuffin that drives a ton of the plot. Also, now I want coffee. And also, Darkwing Duck did an entire episode themed around Twin Peaks, and yes, that has no bearing on the story, but what a world we live in. Seriously, that's like doing an episode of Bluey riffing on Hellraiser. Secondly, well, pay very close attention, because not only is this where Ryukishi really starts flexing his writing muscles. I'm serious, go read this thing. There is no way this dumb little video can do this justice. But it's also where we start getting some crucial clues. Keiichi, in a frankly really difficult sequence to read, cannot help himself and begins getting angry, flat out interrogating the soft-hearted Rena, repeatedly saying that he knows she's lying, totally disregarding Oishi's warning. She keeps it up, and he only becomes more enraged, finally going way too far, grabbing her and full-on shaking her. Dude, what is wrong with you? He stops shaking her, realizing that she's fallen silent. Then, holy crap. This right here, this is when I knew that this manga was something very, very special. Because every time I read this, the hairs begin to rise on the back of my neck. Firstly, it's one of the few double spreads that we've had thus far, and secondly, it's gorgeous. Thirdly, it's terrifying. Rena suddenly looks up at Keiichi, and her eyes, man, her eyes are just all kinds of wrong. Slit-pupiled and furious, with her saying that he is, in fact, the liar. This continues, Rena flipping the script on him, saying that she knows he's been talking to an outsider in his car. Hell, forget the pupils, she's even moving wrong now. Whoa! Keiichi begins denying it, saying that it's nothing to do with her, starting to panic and, wait, what? As the sound of the cicadas starts up, we see color begin leaking into the entire scene, with it taking on sepia tones, as Rena finally begins to calm down, confirming that it does indeed have nothing to do with him. She smiles, and he heaves a sigh of relief. What the hell? Out of nowhere, we get another double spread, all of a sudden in full color, of Rena in a truly terrifying state. Her face now transformed into something monstrous. See what I mean? The art itself is telling the story here. Sure, the anime is great, but the manga is bloody amazing. Do you see now why I was intimidated to cover this? We do get a bit more of the sequence in color, as Rena tells him that yeah, they have secrets, but so does he. Best to leave well enough alone on both counts, right? Wow, just wow. If it wouldn't sound like complete arse coming through my microphone, I would give Ryukishi and Suzuki a standing ovation. This sequence is masterful. And what if I told you that the entire manga is full of moments like this? And this might be one of the weaker examples. Seriously, what are you still doing here? Go and read this thing. But yeah, suddenly Rena seems to snap out of it completely, and her usual happy-go-lucky self grins and says that it's time they went home. Back at home. Oh right, Keiichi's mum and dad. They're around, but you can safely ignore them for the purpose of the mystery. There's something that happens later which will be a good clue, but you are completely able to solve it without involving them at all. He is struggling to reconcile the afternoon's events with, reality, nightmare eyes and all, but no matter how he tries to pass it, he is forced to admit that he saw what he saw. His friend Rena transformed into some sort of shuffling cat-eyed monstrosity and then turned back in an instant. Sure enough, their huge 1980s cordless phone rings. It's Oishi checking in. Keiichi, because he's not that dumb, heads up to his room to talk in private and asks him about the phrase onikakushi. Oishi explains that it's a local dialect term referencing the fact that Hinamizawa has historically been feared by those nearby as the village where demons live. Oh dear. He also confirms what we learned earlier. When the curse strikes, there is always one death and one disappearance. This year, Tomitake died and Mion vanished. However, Keiichi, as again he's not stupid, points out that the fourth year is an anomaly. The victim was female and there was no vanishing. But no, someone did disappear. A boy by the name of Satoshi Hojo. And yes, if both the first and the last names sound familiar, well, there's a reason for that. I hope you've been paying attention. Then Keiichi, to his horror, realizes that 1 year ago, Satoshi was basically where he is now, the sole male member of the club. Soon his father comes back upstairs and begins teasing him about his little girlfriend Rena. Keiichi's confused. Has his dad been spying on him? Well, no. He tells him that she was just here visiting him, right? She even came upstairs to his room. Oh bugger. Yup. Keiichi begins to think his way through the puzzle. Rena came in, went upstairs to his room, but he never saw her due to the layout of his house. This means that there is only one possibility here. She had crept upstairs, approached in silence, and then stood behind him the entire time. Well, shit. And that's where we will leave off today. Next time, we will get to volume 2, which is where this manga starts to get good. But that will have to wait. Anyways, before we finish for the day, I just want to give a huge, heartfelt owl thanks to our amazing patrons, without whom we legitimately could not continue making these videos. Cheshire Quill, Molly McEvoy, Mew Haku, John Knepp, Hunt Hexen, Adclear Andrew, Nate Corbin, Fluffy Burb, Camoleon, Endymion, Jake, Lance Goebel, The Empress, Simone, Squid, The Hedgehog Gamer, Rafferty, Hashtag Hermit, Yorgborg, William, Catstown, Oishi Pun, RJ Grendelsire, Erin Arnold, Callie Caris, Sally Face, Mootle, Mike, Ranger Danger, Rose Montgomery, Inukia Koji, Kel Core, Opinion Custard, Robert Dote, Wargle, Hunting for R2D2, Piece of Yeast, Eleanor, Crazy, Question Man 6, and Cheddar. I also want to give an even, extra special thanks to Jathis, Polite Crow, and Uto, our Owlbard patrons. Seriously, what can I even say here? That is amazingly generous. If you enjoyed this video, why not stick around? Like, subscribe, and all that good YouTube stuff. And if you fancy another good long video, Made in Abyss and Uzumaki are that away. If you want to help support this channel, feel free to check out channel memberships or our Patreon. All links, as always, are in the description. A subscription of any tier gives you access to early videos, some exclusive things, including something pretty big releasing on Halloween, and all sorts of Discord perks. If you fancy something different, Mrs. Owl's art commissions page is also linked in said description. Otherwise, cheers my friends, take care, and I will see you all next time. Until then, this is the Owl, signing off.